On April 19, 1942, in the small village of Slobodka, located in the Smolensk region, an event occurred that was utterly unthinkable for the brutal reality of the Eastern Front. A group of German officers and soldiers lined up in an honor guard around a freshly dug grave. A piercing spring silence hung in the air, broken only by the sound of the wind in the still bare branches of the trees. This was not the burial of their comrade in arms or ally. Enemies, who just yesterday had showered each other with lead and artillery fire, now stood with bowed heads before the body of a Soviet commander. The German general, commanding the troops that were tightening the encirclement, ordered his subordinates to render the last military honors to this man. He addressed his soldiers with a speech that would forever remain in historical chronicles as one of the most striking paradoxes of that war. He said that Wehrmacht soldiers should fight for their homeland just as this Russian general had fought. After this, a rifle salute sounded. In this scene, akin to a myth or legend, lies a colossal drama and the greatness of the human spirit which transcended ideological hatred. The man whom the enemies saw off with such respect on his last journey was Lieutenant General Mikhail Grigoryevich Yefremov, commander of the 33rd Army. His story is not just a chronicle of combat operations or tactical maneuvers. It is an ancient tragedy that unfolded in the forests near Vyazma, where the concept of officers' honor and loyalty to his soldiers became higher than the instinct of self-preservation, and even higher than direct orders from the high command. To understand how this became possible and why this feat still evokes a shiver, we need to go back several months, to a time when the air was permeated not with the smell of spring earth, but with the frosty euphoria of the first major victory. The winter of 1941 to 1942 brought long-awaited hope to the Soviet Union. The Battle of Moscow ended with the enemy being thrown back from the capital. The Wehrmacht, which had seemed invincible, received a crushing blow for the first time and rolled westward. At the headquarters of the Supreme High Command, there was a mood that would later be called _0_. It seemed that the German machine was broken, that the enemy's morale was undermined definitively and irrevocably. And now all that remained was to drive the invaders to the very border without giving them a minute's respite. On huge maps in the Kremlin, red arrows drew bold, sweeping arcs, encompassing entire enemy army groups. The strategic initiative passed into the hands of the Red Army, and the desire to develop this success dictated a pace that, as it would soon turn out, was disastrous. It was in this atmosphere of general enthusiasm that the idea of the Vyazma offensive operation was born. The plan was grand in its scale and audacity: to encircle and destroy Army Group Center, the main German forces in the Moscow direction. A key element of this plan was the city of Vyazma, a vital transportation hub, control over which would mean the collapse of the entire German defense in this sector. The 33rd Army, under the command of Mikhail Yefremov, was assigned the role of the spearhead. It was to break through the enemy's defenses and with a swift thrust reach Vyazma, linking up there with the cavalry corps and airborne units. This was a plan worthy of strategy textbooks, but it relied on the assumption that the enemy was no longer capable of serious resistance. Mikhail Yefremov was a man built for such tasks. At 45, he was already a living legend of the Civil War. It was he, as a young commander, who took Baku with armored trains, making daring raids behind enemy lines. He was valued for his decisiveness, for his ability to act quickly and unconventionally. He was not a parade general. He was a warrior to the core, accustomed to being where the fighting was fiercest. When the order for the offensive was received, Yefremov, like his soldiers, was determined to carry it out at all costs. The army moved forward, breaking through German screens, gnawing into the snow-covered expanses of Smolensk Oblast. The first days of the operation seemed to confirm the correctness of the chosen strategy. The 33rd Army breached the enemy's defenses and rushed into the breakthrough. They advanced, leaving remnants of German units on their flanks, believing that speed was their main defense. However, the reality of war makes its cruel adjustments to any, even the most brilliant plans. The breakthrough turned out to be narrow. Too narrow. The army stretched into a long intestine, going deeper and deeper into the enemy's rear, while the flanks, which were supposed to be secured by neighbors, began to lag behind. The German command, quickly recovering from the initial shock, saw in this not a threat, but an opportunity. Experienced German tacticians realized that the Soviet troops were walking into a trap. In early February 1942, the trap sprang shut. German tank and motorized divisions struck at the base of the breakthrough, cutting off the advanced units of the 33rd Army from the main forces of the Western Front. What had been a triumphant march on Vyazma just yesterday instantly turned into the nightmare of encirclement. General Yefremov and his strike group, 4 rifle divisions, thousands of people, convoys, artillery, found themselves in an icy pocket. Communication with the mainland was cut off. Supplies of ammunition and food ceased. One of the most dramatic chapters of the Great Patriotic War began, where the main enemies were not only German machine guns, but also hunger, cold, and hopelessness. The situation in which Yefremov's men found themselves was monstrous. Deep snow, waist-high, hindered movement. The frosts were severe, equipment stalled and froze. But the most terrible was hunger. Food supplies, calculated for a swift operation, ran out in a matter of days. There were no warehouses in the forests near Vyazma, no way to replenish rations. People began to eat horses. First those that died from enemy fire, then those that succumbed to starvation. When horse meat ran out, everything chewable was consumed. Soldiers boiled leather belts, harnesses, boot soles, trying to trick their stomachs with a murky, bitter brew. Tree bark, steamed in boiling water, was considered a delicacy. But even in these inhumane conditions, the army continued to fight. This was not a passive waiting for the end. Yefremov transformed the encircled group into a fortress that not only defended, but also bit back. They tied down significant enemy forces, preventing the Germans from transferring reserves to other sectors of the front. Yefremov constantly requested permission for a breakthrough, proposing to strike towards the main forces of the front, while the soldiers still had physical strength. However, orders of a different kind came from the front headquarters, commanded by Georgy Zhukov. Continue the offensive on Vyazma. In staff offices, far from the snow-covered forests, the situation was seen differently. There it was believed that the encirclement was temporary, that the outer ring would be broken through any moment, and the 33rd Army had to complete its task to the end. Here begins the second layer of conflict, internal, personal. Mikhail Yefremov found himself caught between the hammer of German attacks and the anvil of his command's orders. He watched his regiments melt away. He saw the eyes of his soldiers sunken from hunger, yet full of trust in their army commander. He understood the absurdity of the order to advance in conditions of complete encirclement and a lack of ammunition. Yefremov was not a rebel. He was a disciplined military man, but his conscience would not allow him to simply drive men to slaughter. Harsh radio exchanges took place between him and Zhukov. Yefremov demanded, pleaded, insisted on a change of objective, arguing that the army would perish if it did not begin a breakthrough immediately. But the answer was unvarying. Hold the line, await assistance, attack. This situation presented the general with an agonizing moral choice. It is easy to be a hero when you are victorious. It is incredibly difficult to maintain one's humanity and will when each day brings only loss and suffering. Yefremov could have tried to save himself. He had such an opportunity, and not just one. But he chose a different path. The path of complete merging of his fate with the fate of his soldiers. He moved between units, often on foot or horseback, encouraging the fighters, sharing their meager rations. He did not hide in a dugout. The soldiers saw him, tall, well-built, despite his exhaustion, always in uniform. The general's presence at the front line was a powerful factor, preventing the army from disintegrating. People knew, quote, "Zero was with them." He had not abandoned them. The culmination of this internal choice was a moment that went down in history as an example of the highest officer nobility. Understanding the critical situation, the Stavka of the Supreme High Command sent a special plane for Yefremov in early April. Stalin's personal order directed the general to fly to the rear to preserve a valuable cadre. The pilot managed to land the light aircraft on a tiny forest clearing under fire. Yefremov walked out to the plane. The engines were running, the propellers spinning, kicking up snow dust. Before him lay a path to salvation. Warmth, food, a hospital, the opportunity to see his family, to continue his career. Behind him, a cold forest, surrounded by enemies, hungry soldiers, and almost certain death. General Yefremov did not hesitate. He handed the division banners to the pilot so they would not fall into enemy hands, and ordered the seriously wounded soldiers and valuable staff documents to be loaded onto the plane. He himself stepped away from the fuselage. His words, later recounted by survivors, sounded simple and terrible in their ordinariness. "I came here with my soldiers. I will leave with my soldiers." He refused the privilege of surviving alone. This was an act that shifted the conflict from the plane of military tactics to the plane of high philosophy of spirit. A commander is not just a position. He is a father to his people. To abandon his children in a burning house for his own salvation was, for Yefremov, an unthinkable betrayal of the very essence of his nature. The plane flew away, carrying the banners and the wounded. Yefremov remained. From that moment, the countdown began in hours. With the onset of spring, the situation became catastrophic. The snow began to melt, turning into icy slush, and then into impassable mud. Rivers, including the Ugra, broke open, cutting off escape routes. The German command, irritated by the persistence of the encircled group, began an operation for its final annihilation. Artillery fire became torrential. Aviation bombed the forest continuously. The 33rd Army, exhausted by months of fighting, began to fragment into small groups. Unified command was lost. Each regiment, each battalion, and sometimes individual groups of fighters fought for themselves, trying to find a breach in the German ring. A tragic exodus began. Yefremov led one of the breakout groups, the largest, attempting to lead the staff and remnants of the divisions to the Ugra River. People walked waist-deep in icy water under crossfire from machine guns. The wounded had to be left behind, as there was no strength to carry them. These were terrible scenes of farewell, when comrades left friends, knowing they were doomed. But even in this hell, Yefremov maintained clarity of mind and tried to coordinate actions. He was wounded, first lightly, then, during another mortar shelling, he received a severe wound that deprived him of the ability to move independently. The soldiers carried their general on improvised stretchers made of poles and greatcoats. They protected him like a banner, understanding that as long as the general was alive, the army was alive. But the ring inexorably tightened. German Jaeger units, specially trained for forest warfare, were hot on their heels. On April 18th, Yefremov's group was pinned down near the village of Gornevo. Ammunition ran out. Only grenades and personal weapons remained. The general understood that this was the end. He could not allow himself to be captured. For a Soviet general, captivity was not just a disgrace. It was a tool of enemy propaganda, a way to break the spirit of the entire country. Yefremov, overcoming the pain, raised himself on the stretcher. Bullets whistled around him. The shouts of Germans offering surrender grew louder and clearer. They were very close now, just a few tens of meters away. He saw his last defenders dying. In this situation, he made the last and most important decision of his life. It was dictated not by fear, but by the highest measure of responsibility. The general pulled out his service pistol. He knew what he was doing. This shot was to put an end to the history of the 33rd Army, not as a history of defeat, but as a history of defiance. The shot was dry and short. Mikhail Grigorievich Yefremov passed away, remaining true to his oath until the last second. Several officers of his staff also ended their lives with him, unwilling to surrender to the enemy. When German soldiers approached the site of the last battle, they found the general's body. Silence fell. The enemies, who had seen much in this war, were astonished. They expected to see a broken, hunted man. But before them lay a warrior who preferred eternity to the humiliation of captivity. It was this moment that led to the scene in the village of Slobodka, with which we began our narrative. General Walter Model, commander of the 9th German Army, personally arrived to examine the enemy's body. He was a tough, pragmatic military leader, but he knew how to appreciate courage. The order for a solemn burial was an act of recognition of professionalism and spirit. The Germans drew up a burial map and handed it to the local residents, saying, quote, "0." This was a unique recognition. In the history of World War II, instances of Nazis burying Soviet commanders with honors can be counted on the fingers of one hand. This indicates that the scale of Yefremov's personality broke through even the armor of Nazi ideology. However, the history of General Yefremov also had its sad aftermath in his homeland. While his enemies honored him, official Moscow remained silent. The death of an entire army and its commander was an inconvenient truth. Admitting tactical errors, admitting that thousands of people were left surrounded, was difficult. For a long time, the circumstances of Yefremov's death were not widely publicized. His name was not completely erased from history, but it seemed to be overshadowed by louder victories. There was also a shadow of distrust. After all, the body remained with the Germans, which meant there was always a tiny, poisonous possibility. What if he was captured? What if he collaborated? Only after the liberation of Smolensk region, when the grave was found and exhumation was carried out, all doubts were finally dispelled. The examination confirmed it was Yefremov, and he died by his own hand. But even after that, it took years for the army commander's feat to take its rightful place in the pantheon of national memory. The significance of what Yefremov accomplished extends far beyond the scope of a specific military operation. The lessons of this tragedy resonate with us even today. First, it is a lesson in leader responsibility. In an era when leadership is often perceived as a privilege and an opportunity to gain benefits, Yefremov's example reminds us that true leadership is first and foremost about self-sacrifice. It is the willingness to share the bitterest cup with one's people. Secondly, it is a lesson about the price of victory. We are accustomed to seeing war through the prism of banners over the Reichstag and parades on Red Square. But victory was forged precisely in such, quote, zero quote, in the tragic encirclements of 41 and 42. The tenacity of the 33rd Army, even in a hopeless situation, drew enormous enemy forces to itself. The German divisions that destroyed Yefremov's men near Vyazma could not at that time storm Leningrad or push towards the Volga. By their demise, they bought time for the country, time to prepare reserves, time for future victories. Their sacrifice was not in vain, though it was horrific. The third lesson is the power of spirit as a factor in history. Technically, the operation ended in defeat. The army was shattered, the territory was not liberated at that moment. But morally, it was a victory. The fact that the general did not flee, that the soldiers fought to the last bullet, laid the foundation for the psychological resilience against which the Wehrmacht ultimately broke. It is impossible to defeat an army whose generals prefer death to captivity, and whose soldiers eat dirt but do not abandon their weapons. Today, in Vyazma, stands a majestic monument by Yevgeny Vuchetich. At the center of the composition is General Yefremov. He is not on horseback, nor in a ceremonial uniform on a tribune. He is depicted at the moment of his last battle, wounded but unbroken, giving commands to his soldiers. This monument is one of the most emotionally powerful memorials of the war. It screams of pain and greatness. It is interesting that the monument bears the words, "To Lieutenant General M.G. Yefremov, Commander of the 33rd Army. Eternal glory to the heroes who fell in battles for the Soviet motherland." But invisibly, the words spoken by the German general over the grave of his enemy are also present there. Yefremov's story teaches us that there are situations in life when the choice seems impossible. Between duty and life, between logic and honor. Yefremov showed that there are things more important than physical existence. His refusal of the rescue plane is not just a gesture. It is an affirmation of human dignity in circumstances where everything around is aimed at trampling that dignity. Concluding the story of the 33rd Army and its commander, we mentally return to that grave in the village of Slobodka. A cold April wind, German greatcoats, the smell of gunpowder and damp earth. At that moment, when the enemies saluted the fallen hero, something more than just a funeral occurred. At that moment, the world, split by war, for a second united in recognition of the highest value, faithfulness to oneself and one's duty. General Yefremov lost the battle for Vyazma, but he won the battle for eternity. He left us an example that a person remains human even in hell, and that true light is visible even through the darkness of the most terrible war. And as long as we remember this choice, to board the plane or to stay, we maintain a connection with that generation that paid an unimaginable price so that we can simply live and make our choices today. This narrative about General Yefremov is a reminder that history is written not with ink in staff documents, but with the blood and heart of those who had the courage to stay until the end. And though the numbers on maps fade, the arrows of offensives change direction. The image of the general standing by the plane and waving goodbye to the departing banners remains in our memory as a symbol of indestructible officers' honor. It was a tragedy that became a triumph of the spirit. Now, let's look at the events from a different angle, delving into the details of what was happening inside the __0_4. Without understanding the daily life of the encircled, the picture will be incomplete. Imagine a forest, not a recreational park, but a dense, wind-felled, snow-covered Russian forest. Thousands of people live in this forest. They have no roof over their heads, save for spruce branches and hastily dug dugouts that flood with water at the first thaw. Smoke from fires is a telltale sign, so they have to huddle together to keep warm. There are no medicines. Bandages are washed in melted snow and used again and again. The wounded lie on spruce branches, quietly dying from gangrene and sepsis. Doctors, themselves barely alive from hunger, perform miracles, operating with simple knives, without anesthesia, under the open sky. Life continued in this hell. Staffs worked. Orders were written on scraps of paper. Political officers tried to maintain morale by reading Sovinformbureau reports, which sometimes had to be invented to give people even a drop of hope. Soldiers cleaned their weapons, guarding every cartridge like the greatest treasure. Discipline was not held by the fear of execution, because death was everywhere anyway. It was held by the authority of commanders like Yefremov. If the general is here, if he endures the same thing, then it must be so. Then there is meaning. Yefremov's relationship with his soldiers is a separate, poignant topic. There are records of him sharing his last hardtack with a young soldier, of how he personally checked posts, finding words of support for freezing sentries. He was not a bronze monument in his lifetime, he was a living, suffering person. He had a wife, a son, whom he loved. The letters he wrote home before the encirclement are full of tenderness and care. He did not want to die. He loved life. And it is precisely this that makes his choice to stay even more significant. To renounce the life you love for the principles you believe in is the highest form of courage. It is also worth noting the role of the enemy in this drama. The German troops opposing Yefremov were the elite of the Wehrmacht. These were battle-hardened units, well-equipped, well-fed, confident. They saw Soviet soldiers only as an obstacle to be removed. But as the weeks passed and the encircled army did not surrender, the attitude began to change. From contempt, the Germans moved to irritation, and then to involuntary respect. In German diaries of that period, one can find entries about the fanatical persistence of the Russians, about how they fight beyond human capabilities. Yefremov became for them a symbol of this incomprehensible, terrifying Russian persistence. The hunt for him was deliberate. German intelligence knew where the headquarters was, knew the call signs. Leaflets dropped from planes promised Yefremov life and honor if he surrendered. But the only answer was silence and new counterattacks. When we talk about breaking out of the encirclement, one must understand the chaos of those days. It was not an orderly march of columns. It was the movement of scattered groups through the night forest, through swamps. There were almost no landmarks. Compasses lied due to magnetic anomalies or simply broke. People walked towards the sound of cannon fire, hoping their own were there. Many groups lost their way and walked directly into German machine guns. Others drowned in the icy waters of the Ugra. Still others, exhausted, simply fell into the snow and never got up again. The fate of thousands of people was decided by chance, luck, the commander's intuition. Yefremov's group was one of many, but it was to them that all the enemy's attention was fixed. In those last days of April, the final drama unfolded. The staff group, burdened with wounded, moved slower than the others. They understood they were a target. The ring was physically tightening. Yefremov was severely wounded in the leg, then in the arm. He was losing a lot of blood. His consciousness was probably fading, but his will remained iron. When it became clear that there would be no breakthrough, that this was the end, he gave his last orders. He commanded those who could still move to escape in small groups, to save themselves, to break through to their own. He left himself no chance. He stayed to cover the retreat of his comrades. The scene of the suicide itself was reconstructed from the testimonies of the few survivors and the results of the body examination. Yefremov sat under a tree. Around him lay the bodies of his officers. He was calm. He had done everything he could. Nothing more depended on him. Only one duty remained: not to let the enemy triumph over a living Soviet general. A shot to the temple. That was the last order he gave himself, and the last order he executed flawlessly. After the war, when the country began to heal its wounds, the history of the 33rd Army gradually emerged from the shadows. The first monuments were modest. Local residents, who had survived the occupation, tended the graves of unknown soldiers, of whom there were countless in those forests. But the figure of Yefremov always stood apart. He became a national hero even before official recognition. Legends of the general who did not fly away were passed from mouth to mouth, recounted in soldiers' heated railway cars, heard in kitchens. Popular memory proved wiser and more expedient than official historiography. People intuitively felt that there was a truth in this act that transcended strategy. Returning to the significance of the events near Vyazma, one cannot fail to mention the strategic aspect, which is often forgotten. The Vyazma operation, despite enormous losses and incompleteness, played a colossal role in the Battle of Moscow. Yes, the Germans could not be completely destroyed in the spring of '42, but Army Group Center was bled dry. It lost its offensive potential. In the summer of '42, the Germans attacked in the south, towards Stalingrad and the Caucasus, but near Moscow, they were on the defensive. They feared a blow from that direction. And this fear was sown, in part, by the courage of Yefremov's fighters. They showed that, even when encircled, the Red Army was dangerous, that there would be no more easy victories. Today, walking through the streets of Moscow, one can see General Yefremov Street. There are schools named after him, there are museums. But the most important monument to him remains the very memory of that choice. We often ask ourselves, what would I have done? Could I have refused salvation? Could I have stayed in the cold forest, knowing that only death lay ahead? The answer to this question is frightening. Most of us honestly admit to ourselves that, most likely, no. And it is this understanding of our own weakness that makes Yefremov's figure so gigantic. He could. He stepped over instinct, over fear, over hope. He became a pure embodiment of duty. In conclusion of this long journey following the traces of the 33rd Army, I want to speak of silence. Of the silence that now stands in the forests near Vyazma. Cartridge cases, helmets, and soldiers' remains are still found there. The forest keeps its secrets. But if you listen, through the rustling of the wind, you can hear the echo of those distant events. Hoarse commands, groans of the wounded, the hum of a plane flying into the sky, and a single shot that ended the hero's life. This silence is filled with meaning. It tells us, remember, not just dates and names of operations. Remember the people. Remember their eyes, their hands, their hearts. Remember General Mikhail Yefremov, the man who conquered death by stepping towards it. This story has no statute of limitations. It will remain relevant as long as the concepts of honor, conscience, and homeland exist. And each time we hear of a heroic deed, we will compare it to the high standards set by Army Commander Yefremov in the spring of '42. a standard that is so difficult to reach, but one that everyone who considers themselves human must strive for. History has completed its circle, bringing us back to the understanding that true greatness lies not in epaulets and ranks, but in the strength of spirit capable of enduring in the face of inevitable doom.